We had no accomplishments. We had no inventions. We had no businesses. We had no life. We had no children. We had no interracial relationships. We had nothing. We had absolutely nothing. We did nothing. Our brain was gone, and we did nothing before 1865. After 1865, okay, now we can give you little, accomplishments now that, the slave narrative can end on this date.
You ain't gotta go nowhere. Everything will be right here, right here. You ain't gotta go nowhere. Everything you need right here, right here.
What's going on? I'm Anoki the One, back with another video, and in this video I will be reacting to a video called African American Lives. This is basically like finding your roots with different celebrities, trying to go through the ancestry and come up with an emotional story about their ancestors, different things like that. This preceded that, so this is a special that Henry Louis Gates did before that with older celebrities. So I'm kind of interested to see what this is about. So if you've been liking my content, like it, hit the like button. You know what I'm saying? YouTube and the algorithm, they've been holding your girl back for a while. If you've ever commented on my videos and you went back and saw that it had disappeared, know that that is YouTube. I don't delete comments. I'm not afraid of, negative comments, positive comments, but clearly YouTube is. They delete almost every video I see. It'll show me that somebody commented, and then when I click on it, it says comment not found. So if you leave a comment, look back in a couple of days and see if it's still there. If it's not, leave it again, okay? Do me a favor and like this.
This document is dated January 6, 1866, and it's a labor contract.
Right.
Now, we've searched post-Civil War labor contracts up and down, looking for as many as we could for every guest in our series. And this is the only one that we've ever found. The only one.
The said Jesse Curry, on his part, promises to furnish the above-named freedmen land to cultivate the farming tools, the horses, the mules, and we, the above-named freedmen, on our part, promises to cultivate sufficient grain for the use of the family and stock the balance in cotton.
Right.
Oh, I hated the cotton field because there were those hairy worms crawling, there were the spiders, and also the picking of the cotton. I couldn't quite get as much in my sack as everybody else. And everyone was picking and pushing it down, and their sacks were really full, and I really wanted that.
How old were you when you started?
Oh, I don't really remember, but what you do remember is the cones, your hands and the cuticles. And
She is saying she was picking cotton.
Well, Tina, this document lays out the terms.
Hold on, wait. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Do you see how quick he jumped to go back? He wanted to change that subject. Do you see how fast he wanted to change that subject? Now, I have talked about this in the other videos reacting to this type of things, and this is why I said you should talk to your elders. This is why you should talk to your elders. Tina Turner literally just went down the line telling y'all how she was picking cotton when she was young, and very clearly described how she was doing it and what she didn't like about it, and how other people were faster than she was, different things like that. They don't tell us that our grandparents was picking cotton and was getting paid for it. Okay? They don't tell us that people were getting very wealthy actually on the field picking the cotton and putting the cotton together and selling it and exporting it across the world with their family. My grandpa told me of a very wealthy family, same complexion as him, that all they did was pick cotton, the whole family. And he was like, old man, whatever his name was, he was like, he was lucky because he had 5 boys. So he had 5 boys to help him pick all the cotton on their land. And he said they had like 20 bales of cotton every whatever, I don't know, every season or something like that. And they would weigh it and they would make a bunch of money. You see how they be missing people? You see how you want to hop step into this labor contract? Do you know that when we get into a job, we're signing a labor contract? So he's trying to hurry up and take her back because she's getting off narrative. You can't get off narrative, Tina. The whole time she was talking, he wasn't into it at all, even though he knows the history. He probably was pink cotton when he was little too. But he want to have a stern face. He don't want to be like, shit, yeah, I know what she talking about. My daggone fingers was jacked up too. I'm so glad we ain't got to do that no more. He hurried up and changed that subject.
And his family would barter their labor with the white man named Jesse Curry, the same man who had owned them before the Civil War ended.
Yes.
So they didn't leave, they stayed, but they struck up a deal with them.
Yes.
An arrangement, as you know, that came to be called sharecropping.
Yes.
The relationship between Logan Curry and his former master changed dramatically. Instead of owner and property, they were now employer and employee, an important step towards genuine equality.
It's the same thing.
We searched the records to see what else we could find out about Logan Curry.
I solemnized the right of matrimony between the within named parties on the 27th day of December 1870.
And look who signed it.
Logan Curry, M.G.
Minister of the Gospel.
Ah,
It seems that your great-great-grandfather Logan had become a minister. Between the year 1870, 5 years after slavery ended, and 1888, Logan Curry married more than 50 black couples. As soon as slavery ended, one of the first things black people did was they sought out a minister and the courthouse to legalize their relationships, which hadn't been legal under slavery. And your great-great-grandfather Logan was one of the people sanctioning the institution of marriage.
Yeah, see, no, some of that is off because it must depend on what part of the United States you was in, because I have marriage records. Well, see, this is a black narrative. Okay. They always say black people this, black people that, black people this, black people that. We have to separate ourselves from that verbiage, because when you actually do your genealogy, depending on where you are, okay, in 1800s, the time when he's talking about, it was Native American land in the South. Okay, so when no white people, when no, indigenous people had ceremonies before. So what he's talking about is legal within the United States construct, but people was getting marriage records through their personal churches that they started, they owned, that they created since the beginning of time. So this is weird, kind of weird. It doesn't make sense, right? But it goes with a slave narrative. Also, what I want to say, he said something else. Oh, the whole sharecropper transitioning from being called a slave and him owning him to him being a sharecropper and him bartering services. It was pretty much the same thing. Okay, and it always was that, really. And some people may say it's unfair, it's not fair, or it is fair, but we're pretty much still doing the same thing. You can call it what you want to call it, but you're working to have a place to stay and food. Now, back then, the only kind of work in certain areas was on the field. Now, 9 times out of 10, the white man was on the field too. That's the only work there was. If people went missing, he had to be on the field. But also, there was plenty of people who didn't have a white man on the field, on the plantation, overseeing them, who wasn't owning them. They had plenty of black people who was overseeing, who was the slave owner and owning other people, because that was the language of what they call it. If we were to use the same context as back then, if you were an entrepreneur, you're a slave owner. If you're an employee, you're owned by that entrepreneur. They own you. Okay, you sign a contract, and some people back then, they probably wouldn't sign a contract. Okay, it was just, this is how it is. Or they may have. But also, he doesn't go into the records of the man being a slave. That's another thing. He talks about the record of the labor contract and different things like that. But he doesn't point to a document or point to any verifiable evidence that this man was ever an actual slave of this man. The only record he has is of a labor contract after slavery is over. So it's leading you to make assumptions. Again, they always make you make assumptions. Now, people, some of y'all are gonna feel the way, because when I'm saying these things, people always want to say, oh, you're in denial, you're in denial. I'm not denying anything. I just want to know how can I accept, y'all talking about in denial. In order for me to accept the information, I need you to give me an information to accept. What document, what proof do you have that he was ever anything other than somebody bartering his services? He didn't mention that at all. He just made an assumption. He just threw some words out there. We've been trained, brainwashed in that all the time, so we just accept it.
It's great information. Really great.
Marriage was not only an act of love and commitment, it was also an opportunity for the former slaves to exercise their new rights as citizens. But some families still bore the scars of slavery, especially those that crossed racial lines.
Do you consider Alfred Carr part of your family?
Sure, he's my great-great-grandfather. There's no getting around that.
No.
Is there any way to get around that?
No.
Actor Morgan Freeman is fascinated by his family history. He's traced his ancestry all the way back to his great-great-grandmother, Celie Johnson, who was black, and his great-great-grandfather, Alfred Carr, who was white. We wondered if Celie Johnson had been a victim of sexual exploitation, like so many other black women back then. So we were surprised to see that the 1870 census for Mississippi shows Celie Johnson and her 8 children living with Alfred Carr 5 years after the end of slavery. Going back even further,
This is what I'm talking about. These are spells. All these assumptions are spells. All these assumptions are part of a narrative, right? Because he asked Morgan Freeman the question of if he considers this his third great grandfather as a part of the family, because he knows the narrative, the spell, okay, the myth, largely, oftentimes, because largely a myth, and I'm getting a book about it because I just was doing research on one of my ancestors, and I went down this rabbit hole. Now, where would they even get the information? Let's think about that. For all these cases that they're assuming happened where it was a white man who raped a black woman, where are they getting all this information? Where are the court documents? Where are any documents? Where are any real documents of this? Okay, that's the question you need to ask. This question a lot of people don't want to ask. All right. Now, because if you're saying it happened, right, but you have no evidence that it happened, and this is gonna make people feel away because, you know, this is a very touchy topic. But how can you say it happened if you're not telling anybody how you know this? You're not telling anybody how. You know what I'm saying? You just throw it out there. And it didn't really hit home until I read, this is from a book called The Strange History of the American Quadroon, Free Women of Color in the Revolutionary Atlantic World. I highly recommend y'all get it. Mine is on the way. Now I'm gonna read directly from it. This is a quote. So even though mixed race women could be found anywhere after the importation of the first Africans to Jamestown in 1619, they remain unacknowledged until the Haitian Revolution prompted thousands to set sail from the Caribbean to American shores. According to Clark, the figurative quadroon emerged as a necessary vehicle through which to neutralize the threat embodied in biracial procreating women. Now, Morgan Freeman's story is a biracial procreating woman. Okay, I have a picture of a biracial procreating woman in my family with her white husband and 9 or 10 kids. And they were married or living together in the 1800s. Okay? She doesn't look like she was in bondage and being held against her will. Even though that's the narrative they want us to have. Why? Why? The foreign females of color who migrate to the United States from the blood-soaked shores of Haiti could be mastered and controlled by white American man. Narratives of sexual triumph could counter whites' fear that black rebellion would spread to the American mainland. Furthermore, although her literal presence was pervasive, the quadroon's emblematic existence could be imaginatively contained geographically, which was in New Orleans. So largely they only use the quadroon language in the Caribbean and in New Orleans. And basically, they came up with that narrative, what she's saying in this book, from research, from verifiable evidence of records, because they don't have records of this narrative that they're talking about. They have records of this myth that they're saying. They just threw it out there to appease white people after the Haitian Revolution, okay, where the Haitians was whooping the French's ass, whooped Napoleon's ass. He's supposed to be the greatest conqueror in the world. The Haitians whooped his ass, okay, had bloodshed, had them run into the U.S. shores in droves, okay, and now they were scared. They were scared that, these black men, for one, or these black women could infiltrate the community and have white ancestry and Haitian ancestry together. And that was just like a nightmare to them. They were like, we can't have these black people mixing with us. That would, and really, it was more so the elites, because that would ruin their control, because then you have a mixed race society, and you couldn't Jim Crow them if you're white and black at the same time. How you gonna Jim Crow me? What you gonna do? That's why there's a lot of confusion. That's why they forced people who look damn near white, if they had one speck of dot of anything, y'all black. You're all black. You can't identify with any of your white ancestors, even though the only ancestors you know of is white. Y'all all black now. Okay? So we need to break that spell. We need to break that spell. It is a narrative. It is a myth. And the myth, and people in this pro-black people still be trying to keep up with that myth, even though the myth was created by white supremacists. That's the stuff that be getting me too. That's the stuff that be getting me. Pro-black people want to keep up this narrative when the narrative was created by white supremacists. Now, to me, a lot of these really famous pro-black people that keep this narrative together, I think they are white supremacists, and I think that they know they're white supremacists, and I think they're paid by white liberals to be white supremacists with the black narrative around it. But that's just me. You know what I'm saying? They want to keep this spell alive. The only people keeping this spell alive at this point is black, pro-black people, and it was created by white supremacists. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? We need to free ourselves from that. Anyway, they always want to make that assumption, but when it comes to actually looking in the records and seeing how somebody actually is mixed, you almost never can pinpoint that for sure. Okay, and you're left to assumptions. But if you look at the actual documents, you see, okay, they lived together, until after the Civil War, and then they got married, possibly, or they just lived together.
What else could records tell us about Seeley and Alfred? Well, we looked at the 1860 census.
Wait a minute.
Mississippi shows Seeley Johnson and her 8 children.
It shows Seeley Johnson as white. This is what I'm talking about. See, this is stuff they don't talk about. This is stuff they don't say, they don't bring up. It is showing Celie Johnson as white. It has W right there. Now, they know that she was dark-skinned, but in the census, because technically, by law, they're not allowed to be together, they had to classify her as white in order for her to be with him, but that doesn't mean they weren't together. So see how, like, they got laws and different rules going on right now that most of us probably don't even know, or we just work around it. So, but when they speak back about history, they make it seem like this was never happening because it was against the law. Just like how weed is illegal. Now, what if they in 2030 said weed was outlawed until 2020, so nobody ever smoked weed until after it was no longer outlawed. No, that's not what happened. See, but that's what they want us to believe. There was no interracial relationships. There's no interracial marriages, no relationships where a white man and a black woman were together, or a black man and a white woman was together. They were never together until after it was legalized. Come on now, stop playing.
Living with Alfred Carr.
See how he don't point that out? She was considered white. All their kids was considered white. You see how they do that? You see how you just work around that?
Tell us.
They don't talk about it.
Celie and Alfred. Well, we looked at the 1860 census for Attala County.
Alfred was 60. He was laboring on a farm. Value of personal estate was $2,000, and he was born in North Carolina.
Now, if you look 2 lines up, you can see the head of household. In other words, the farm owner for whom Alfred Carr worked.
It says Mr. Andrew Johnson.
And this same Johnson family owned your great-great-grandmother, Celie Johnson. So your great-great-grandfather was working for the Johnson family and living on their farm. And Morgan having children with one of their slaves. Which meant that any and all children that she bore were their property as well. Now, how does it make you feel?
Wait a minute. Now, they just described how his great-great-great-grandfather was working for these people who we don't know if they're actually white or not, because they're saying she's white on this census. They don't point that out. Now, they just described how he was working under them. Okay, he was working for them as a laborer. Okay, on the plantation. Now, they're not assuming that he was a slave. They didn't say he was a slave under the same slave owner as your grandmother and the children. They didn't say that. Why? You see how that happened? So were they all slaves? Or, see, they want us to assume that white people could not possibly be slaves, for one. And they also want us to assume that black people could not possibly be free. See how they did that? Now, both of these people could have been slaves. Or, both of them could have been free. And all their children could have been free, and they had a labor contract, and they were working with a particular service, and they were bartering to own they were bartering to have a place to live and a place to eat, okay, and food to eat and all this other stuff. Because of the times they were in, that was just kind of the system. You work for shelter and food. Or you starve. A lot of people starved. A lot of people died, okay? Or you're off like the natives, tribes. You have your own little lot of land. You build on your land. You have crops on your land, and that's it. You're not worried about nothing else. Nothing else. You want no luxuries. You want nothing extra. You just want to live a regular life. Okay, they had that. Okay, but most people, they found a plantation, okay, to be up under. Just like how most people today, they find a corporation to be up under. They get comfortable. They build a family, and they stay there.
Well, I don't know, really.
Alfred Carr just stood by while Seeley Johnson and their 8 children were held in slavery for years. Why did she end up living with this man once she was free? We went to Atala County to examine the records.
Yeah, because I'm real interested.
About Seeley.
I'm real interested because they're assuming that, talking about he stood by while she was a slave for all these years. They were working in the same plantation.
Seeley, and about her family's relationship to Alfred. We discovered that in 1869, Alfred Carr purchased property with James, his eldest son, with Seeley.
Is that right?
Then a year later, Carr sells the same piece of land to James and to 3 of his brothers. When you were growing up, did your family ever,
Not one word.
not one word? Now, it would be certainly surprising if 4 very young men who had been slaves had the sum of $1,500 just 5 years after emancipation.
Okay.
Well, according to Mississippi law, illegitimate children could not inherit property. Yet maybe this was a way for Alfred Carr to provide for Seeley and their mixed children.
Really?
Well, we went to the land that Alfred bought and sold to his sons 140 years ago, and look what we found. Would you mind turning page of the scrapbook
Absolutely.
to 18?
Seeley Carr. Alfred Carr.
Morgan, whatever the nature of their relationship, whatever it may have been during slavery times, your great-great-grandparents decided they would be buried side by side.
Because they were
Old
married.
Carr land surrounded by the graves of their children.
And it's still there.
It's, as of Friday, brother, it was still there.
Boom. So the simple workaround, they showed it in the census. Since illegitimate children weren't allowed to have land, okay, well, the easy workaround is, guess what? They're not illegitimate. They're not mulattoes. They're not, because basically outside of marriage or whatever, they're not mulattoes. They're not, or biracial. They're not black. We're all white. How about that? Give my sons my goddamn land now. And that's what clearly happened.
When we look back at the records, we figured out that Seeley and Alfred had been together for about 35 years by the time that Alfred died in 1882. Maybe that's why the person who made these headstones called her Seeley Carr.
They were married. What? So basically, they weren't legally able to get married because of the laws in America. So they just had a common law marriage between themselves, and they just was together and raised their kids. That simple. And my grandpa told me how when he was younger, people did that all the time. They were just like, okay, well, we can't get married, but we're still gonna be together. That's just like how gay people been together all this time. And just because they didn't have legal marriages didn't mean they weren't pretty much married. They want you to think that just because the marriage wasn't legal, that they weren't pretty much living as a married couple and didn't live their life and pass things on to their children like they was married. Just workarounds. And you got some, and I would say even self-hating, because people always want to talk about self-hating when it comes to, like, there's some people who would look at the smile that he had on his face, finding out that, you know, his grandmother and his grandfather, who was an interracial couple, they would look at him smiling about finding out that they loved each other and it wasn't just some rape story. They would look at that and say, oh, he's self-hating. He's just happy that, you know, he has a white man as his great-great-grandfather. He's hating his black man and all this other. The man is still his ancestor. The man literally passed land down. Pretty much, if they were to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, if his grandmother was a slave, grandmother was a slave under this plantation, that white man was a slave too. He was doing the same. They literally just described they were doing the same thing. That's how they met each other. They were working for the same man. Either they were slaves or just employers or whatever, employees, whatever, and built the whole family. Now, a lot of y'all know y'all have white people in your ancestry, but y'all want to assume instead of doing the research, and you're self-hating really because that's your actual ancestor. You can talk about self-hating. People always want to talk about self-hating about random people that they don't know, celebrities, and if you don't agree with all kind of different narratives. But when it comes to your own ancestors, you want to also say it's self-hating for being happy that you have great grandparents that love each other even though they're not the same race, and they went through all kinds of different hassles to be together even though it was illegal, but they still made sure they had their tombstones next to each other and had the name Sealy Carr because he said, you my wife, I don't give a goddamn what the United States says, okay, and these my children, I don't give a goddamn, and they legitimate, I don't give a goddamn what they say, and I'm passing my land and I'm gonna figure it out. Okay, y'all will say that's self-hating, but that looks like love. They loved each other. They loved each other. So we need to break these spells. We need to break these curses because you're cursing yourself when you judge and assume and you don't accept all of your ancestors because they all came together to make who you are. It's not just the ones that you think looks like you. And just skin tone wise, literally, that's so stupid. Just skin tones wise, because some of these people, even though they're white, they still look like you. You still got facial features from these people because they're your actual ancestors, but y'all want to identify with people that y'all don't even know, Martin Luther Kings and all kinds of different people that they've propped up to be your hero. But then you want to dismiss your own ancestors because of a narrative that strangers have told you. You see?
Whatever her reasons may have been, Morgan's great-great-grandmother defied custom by living with this white man.
What do you mean whatever the reasons may have been? See, you see how they're not allowed to say that the reason that they defied customs was because Alfred Carr fell in love with Sealy. Sealy and Alfred fell in love with each other. You see how crazy that is with this interracial, still to this day? You're not allowed to say, this white man fell in love with this black woman, and this black woman fell in love with this white man. And they love each other. And they love each other so much that they risk their lives, possibly, to stay together and to pass their property on. $2,000 is a lot of money back then. That's a lot of money, okay? Passed the land down to the family, to the children, his children, will now be considered black children, okay? And that's just what it is. That's the reason. Ain't no other reason. What other reason would there be? What other reason would there be? Why you can't just say that? Love. Love is the reason. Why you can't say that?
Maybe this was the
Love.
most important part of being free. Finally, Sealy and all the other former slaves could make choices of their own.
That was so annoying. Maybe this is the main reason being they was making that choice before they was quote unquote free. They was together according to what you just said, and it was having children according to what you said before the Civil War, before slavery was technically over. So why are you being over dramatic right now? Why? And if slavery had to do with it, the white man was enslaved too. They would work for the same plantation. They was doing the same job.
I hate to say it, but my mother really didn't talk all that much about it. I know that she was from a very prominent family, but not much conversation there.
Uh-oh. You know, that goes against the narrative. So they're gonna have to figure out what's wrong with this picture. She's copper colored and she comes from a prominent family. What's wrong with that picture? Let's see.
Soon after Lyndon Johnson Rice's great-grandfather, William McAlpine, got his freedom, he became a Baptist minister. But he had even greater aspirations.
After he got his freedom, show us where he had to get his freedom. Show us how he had to get his freedom. Show us the man was born in 1847. That was about 20 years before slavery ended. Show us. Don't just tell us that, you know, once he got his freedom, because the assumption is that all people of color were enslaved until 1865. It's a lie. This is what we need to know. So don't make this assumption. Don't allow other people to make this assumption. Stop saying, well, when he got his freedom. You don't know, he could have been easily born free, just like other people could have been born free. Stop making that assumption.
Beyond leading the church, this is a page from 1873, the Colored Baptists of Alabama, the state convention.
Reverend W.H. McAlpine introduced the following: resolved that we plant in the state of Alabama a theological school to educate our young men.
1873, Linda. Slavery just ended 1865. 8 years later, this brother has the audacity to introduce this resolution. Okay, would you read the next part?
8 years after slavery, this brother had the audacity to do anything other than slavery. And how do we know he wasn't a pastor before 1865? He was probably a pastor before 1865. He was probably doing the same thing before 1865. It's just now he was able to do a little bit more because the laws are different. And who knows, they're not even telling you what part of the country that they're in right now, that he's in. So they're not giving you much context. I think he said Alabama. So they're not giving you a lot of context, really. Okay. This brother had the nerve to do something with his life after slavery ended, 8 years after slavery. Do you know, right after the Civil War, they had more people of color, copper-colored people in office, in political office, than they have right now, like right after. And to assume that all these highly intelligent, highly educated people, highly educated enough to be political leaders, quote unquote, 5 years, 10 years, 1 year, 2 years after slavery ended, you have to really think about what were they doing? They obviously wasn't just mindlessly doing field work all the time. Some of these people were doing other things. Some of these people were owning business. Some of these people had into trade. Some of these people were getting highly educated overseas and different things like that. Some of these people came from well-off families. I have evidence of that in my ancestry. So they make it seem like, okay, you went from slave to African American in 1865, and now we have a whole new narrative for you after the 1865.
White Baptist Convention assembled in the same city at the same time advised against the educational scheme, of course.
Why do you say of course?
Black people, intelligent, coming together as a group, strength in numbers? Oh no.
Terrifying.
How are we going to control them?
Even the church at that time, which recognized black people had souls, even the church did not want black people to be autonomous. You know, Lord don't want y'all to be too free yet.
You're out of our control. That's not what we want.
Blacks came out of slavery, not a lump of clay. But they came out of slavery with definite ideas.
Whose voice was that? I don't know what the hell that was. Anyway, that was the end of the video. That was weird. But anyway, we gotta break free. They want us to think that our ancestors before 1865 had no intelligence in their mind. They wasn't doing nothing at all of substance. The only thing they was doing was picking cotton and being maids and cooks for white people. They want us to believe that, you know, we weren't warriors. They don't want us to believe that we were in the military before 1865 unless we were fighting, you know, as slaves, and it was so horrible because we didn't get to choose that we were going to fight a war. So, you know, we we can't really be proud of it because we didn't choose. They want us to believe we had no autonomy, we had no brain, we had no accomplishments, we had no inventions, we had no businesses, we had no life, we had no children, we had no interracial relationships, we had nothing. We had absolutely nothing. We did nothing. Our brain was gone, and we did nothing before 1865. After 1865, okay, now we can give you little, you know, accomplishments now that, you know, the slave narrative can end on this date. Stop that. This is why you need to do your genealogy. That's why you need to do it for yourself. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. And start to really question these things, because once you start to question it and once you start to do the research for yourself, and most importantly, your genealogy, because that really allows you to be unattached from the stuff that they're saying and ask the right questions. All right, I'll see y'all in the next video. Like, subscribe, comment. Like, subscribe, comment.
Everything you need right here, right